White cop tries to remove black woman from court. Then a White House call changes everything. A black female lawyer fighting for justice in a small-town courtroom. But when the phone rings from the White House, no one could have predicted what came next. The sun cast long beams of light through the tall windows of the Arlington County Courthouse. The room buzzed with quiet whispers as people settled into the hard wooden benches. The weight of the morning's proceedings thick in the air. In the center of the room stood Maya Collins, a striking black woman with sharp eyes and unwavering demeanor, her tailored navy suit pristine, and her curly hair pulled back into a neat bun. She stood behind a defense table, her hands resting calmly on the polished wood, facing the judge with confidence that silenced even the faintest murmurs. Her client, a young black mother named Denise Harper, sat beside her, hands trembling, eyes filled with fear. Denise was accused of shoplifting and resisting arrest, charges that could tear her away from her 2-year-old son if convicted. But Maya knew the truth. She had seen the surveillance footage, had read the statements. The accusations didn't add up. And Maya Collins was not a woman who let injustice go unchallenged. Judge William Carter, a stern-faced man with graying hair and a gavel that rarely collected dust, cleared his throat. "Ms. Collins, you may continue the defense." Maya nodded, her voice steady but commanding. "Your Honor, what we have here is a case built on assumptions, not facts." "My client, objection." A voice rang out, cutting through Maya's words like a blade. All heads turned to see Lieutenant Richard Harris standing at the back of the courtroom, his Navy uniform crisp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Harris was well known in Arlington. Some called him a hero, others whispered about his methods. But one thing was certain, he was not a man who liked being challenged, especially not by someone like Maya Collins. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Lieutenant Harris, you are not the prosecutor in this case. Kindly take your seat." But Harris didn't move, his icy blue eyes locked onto Maya. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this woman is obstructing justice. She's twisting facts and disrupting the proceedings." Maya turned slowly, meeting his gaze head-on. Her voice was calm, but the fire behind her eyes was unmistakable. "Obstructing justice, Lieutenant, or exposing the truth you don't want to hear." A ripple of gasps spread to the courtroom. Harris's jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his sides. "Ms. Collins," the judge warned, but Maya didn't flinch. "I have every right to defend my client against baseless charges," she continued, "and I won't be intimidated out of this courtroom." Harris took a step forward, his towering frame casting a shadow over the gallery. "Maybe you should be—" The tension crackled like static. The judge pounded his gavel. "Enough, Lieutenant Harris. Take your seat, or I'll have you removed." Harris sneered, but before he could respond, a bailiff approached Maya, whispering urgently. She nodded, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this as evidence." She handed a flash drive to the clerk, who inserted it into the courtroom's monitor. A grainy video played. It showed Rachel Hayes entering a convenience store, browsing the aisles. Then came the crucial moment. Rachel walked toward the exit, empty-handed, but as she stepped outside, Graves himself appeared, pulling her back in, claiming she had stolen something. The video showed no such action. Naomi folded her arms. "This footage clearly shows my client leaving without any stolen goods, yet she was arrested moments later by Lieutenant Graves without probable cause." The room erupted in murmurs. Graves' face turned red. "That footage is doctored." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "By whom, Lieutenant?" "The store security system." Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Lieutenant Graves, this is a serious accusation." "Ms. Carter, please continue." Naomi took a deep breath, ready to dismantle every false claim when Graves stepped forward again, fury evident in his every move. "This is a circus. She's grandstanding, trying to undermine law enforcement. She doesn't belong here." Naomi's voice cut through his rant like a blade. "I belong here just as much as you do, Lieutenant. The difference is, I'm here to protect the innocent." Graves turned to the judge. "I'm requesting that she be removed from this courtroom immediately." Gasps echoed once more. The judge hesitated, unsure of how to handle the explosive situation. The bailiff stepped forward, waiting for instructions. Naomi's voice remained even, but there was a sharpness to it now. On what grounds? Because I'm a black woman defending another black woman? Or because I'm exposing the flaws in your case? The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Whitmore sighed. Ms. Carter, please. Before he could finish, Graves barked, remove her. The bailiff hesitated but began to approach Naomi. Rachel clutched at Naomi's sleeve, whispering, please don't leave me. Naomi placed a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder, then turned back to the judge. This isn't over, she said firmly. Just as the bailiff reached for her arm, the courtroom phone on the judge's bench rang. Sharply, everyone froze. Judge Whitmore frowned, picking up the receiver. This is Judge Whitmore. Yes, I understand. Are you certain? Immediately, his face went pale as he placed the phone down, clearing his throat. Stand down, he ordered the bailiff. Ms. Carter will remain. Graves' eyes narrowed. What? Who was that? The judge's voice was even, but his expression was unsettled. That was the White House. Effective immediately. Ms. Carter is to remain in this courtroom. No further actions are to be taken against her. The room was stunned into silence. Naomi tilted her head slightly, a faint knowing smile playing at the corner of her lips. Graves, on the other hand, looked like a man whose world had just shifted under his feet. From the White House, someone whispered from the gallery. Naomi's eyes never left Graves. She leaned in just enough for him to hear her voice, a soft murmur. Game on, Lieutenant. As the gavel struck, once more, signaling a recess, the tension in the room didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew thicker. Naomi adjusted her suit jacket, gave Rachel a reassuring nod, and walked out of the courtroom with the poise of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Graves, however, clenched his fists, his mind already racing. Something wasn't right. Why would the White House care about a small-time lawyer in Arlington? But Naomi knew, and soon everyone else would too. Before the courtroom battles, before the White House calls, there was a young black girl who faced injustice and vowed to fight it, no matter the cost. The soft hum of the courthouse ventilation system faded as Naomi Carter sat alone in her modest office. The walls were lined with legal books, case files stacked neatly on her desk, and a single photograph of a young girl clutching a worn book on civil rights. Naomi's fingers grazed a photo's edge as memories began to surface, pulling her back to where it all began. The sound of sirens was a familiar background noise in the South Side neighborhood where Naomi grew up. Cracked sidewalks and flickering street lights lined the streets, but amidst the harshness of her environment, young Naomi found solace in books. She devoured stories of heroes, both fictional and real, people who stood up against oppression and fought for what was right. One evening, at just 11 years old, Naomi experienced an event that would forever change her. She stood on the front steps of her apartment building, clutching her school books, when she saw her neighbor, Mr. Johnson, being handcuffed by 2 police officers. His wife, Mrs. Johnson, sobbed uncontrollably, but he didn't do anything. Naomi shouted, her young voice trembling with both fear and defiance. When the officer sneered, "Stay out of this, kid. Not your business." But it was her business. Mr. Johnson, a kind man who often helped Naomi with her homework, was accused of a robbery he didn't commit. Naomi watched helplessly as he was shoved into the back of a patrol car. Days later, despite the lack of evidence, Mr. Johnson was sentenced. Naomi never forgot the look in his eyes, betrayal, hopelessness, and a silent plea for someone to fight for him. From that moment, Naomi knew her path. She promised herself that she would become the person who would stand up when no one else would. Naomi's determination never wavered. She excelled in school, earning scholarships that led her to Howard University, a historically black university known for producing some of the nation's finest legal minds. But even there, Naomi felt the weight of societal expectations pressing down on her. She wasn't just studying law, she was preparing for war. Late nights in the library became her routine. She pored over cases of wrongful convictions, police brutality, and systemic racism. Every story fueled her anger, but also her resolve. She wasn't just gaining knowledge. She was arming herself with the tools to dismantle the very system that had failed so many. Her professors often marveled at her sharp intellect and unbreakable spirit. "You're to change the world." One day, one professor told her after a heated debate in class. Naomi simply smiled. She didn't want to change the world. She wanted to fight for those the world had forgotten. Graduation came, but Naomi wasn't content with just being another lawyer. She wanted more. She needed to be where decisions were made, where real change could happen. Naomi's brilliance didn't go unnoticed. Fresh out of law school, she received an offer that many could only dream of, a position as a legal advisor at the White House. At first, she was hesitant. The White House was power, politics, and bureaucracy. Everything she despised. But then she realized, what better place to fight the system than from within? Her first day at the White House was surreal. The marble halls, the historic portraits, the hushed conversations. It was a world so far removed from Southside Chicago. But Naomi was not there to admire the scenery. She was there to work. Over the next few years, Naomi became known for her sharp legal mind and unyielding ethics. She advised on cases involving civil rights, police reform, and judicial integrity. Presidents came to trust her and colleagues respected her. But Naomi never let the allure of power distract her from her mission. One night, while working late, Naomi received a call from an old friend in Chicago. Another wrongful conviction. Another black man sentenced without proper evidence. She hung up the phone, staring at her reflection in the window. "This is why I became a lawyer," she whispered to herself. The next morning, she resigned from the White House. She didn't give a grand speech or a heartfelt goodbye. She simply packed her things and walked away from power to return to the front lines. Naomi's return to courtroom was met with mixed reactions. Some saw her as a hero. Others viewed her as a threat. But Naomi didn't care about opinions. She cared about justice. Her cases often pitted her against the most powerful figures in law enforcement. She exposed corruption, Shaw the innocent, and made enemies with every victory. And she thrived on it. But Naomi's most dangerous adversary was yet to come. Lieutenant Daniel Graves. Naomi first encountered Graves during a case involving police misconduct. Graves, with his imposing frame and icy demeanor, dismissed her efforts, calling her just another bleeding heart lawyer. But Naomi saw through him. She recognized the arrogance, the sense of untouchable authority. She knew men like Graves all too well, and she vowed to bring him down. As the years passed, their paths crossed numerous times. Graves' influence grew, but so did Naomi's reputation. Their silent war continued, each trying to outmaneuver the other. And then came the case of Rachel Hayes. Rachel's case wasn't just another trial for Naomi. It was personal. She saw herself in Rachel, the same fear, the same desperation. And Naomi knew that if she didn't fight, Rachel would become another forgotten victim of a broken system. But Naomi also knew something Graves didn't. She wasn't alone. What Graves and many others didn't know was that Naomi never severed all her ties with the White House. She maintained a network of allies, individuals who believed in her cause, and when she realized how deep Graves' corruption ran, she knew she needed to call in every favor she had left. Naomi stood in her office, the memories swirling around her like a storm. She clenched her fists, staring at her reflection in the window, just as she had the night she left the White House. "This time," she whispered, "they'll know exactly who they're dealing with." Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "We're ready when you are." Naomi smiled faintly, her mind sharp and focused. "Let's begin." A man in uniform, hailed as a hero by some, feared by many, but behind the badge lies a puppet master pulling strings in the shadows. And now he feels the strings tightening around him. The dim-glowed computer screen flickered in the otherwise dark office. Lieutenant Daniel Graves leaned back in his leather chair, his piercing blue eyes locked on the image display before him. Naomi Carter standing defiantly in the courtroom, his jaw tightened as he replayed the scene from earlier that day, the moment the White House intervened. His fingers drummed against a mahogany desk, a rhythmic reminder of his growing frustration. For years, Graves had built his reputation, brick by brick, not through integrity but through calculated manipulation. And now, All of it was at risk because of her. Graves hadn't always been in Arlington. His career started in a small precinct outside of Baltimore, where he quickly learned that power wasn't about enforcing the law. It was about controlling it. Fresh out of the academy, he watched senior officers plant evidence, coerce confessions, and cover their tracks with ease. At first he hesitated, but the allure of power proved too tempting. His first major case involved a teenage boy accused of assaulting a store owner. The evidence was thin, but Graves found a way: a planted weapon, a coerced statement, and a jury convinced of the boy's guilt. The conviction earned Graves his first commendation. It also taught him a valuable lesson. The truth is what you make it. Over the years, Graves climbed the ranks, mastering the art of manipulation. He wasn't a brute force type. His power lay in subtlety. He forged alliances with judges, prosecutors, and even politicians, each one a piece on his chessboard. Those who challenged him found themselves discredited, disgraced, or worse. By the time he arrived in Arlington, Graves was untouchable, or so he thought. In Arlington, Graves' influence seeped through every corner of the police department. Young officers admired him, senior officials respected him, and criminals feared him. But Graves didn't operate alone. He had a network: informants, officers, and even legal professionals who owed him favors or feared his retribution. One of his most trusted allies was Detective Lucas Boyd, a man with his own skeletons. Together they orchestrated arrests, manipulated evidence, and silenced dissenters. Graves' reach extended beyond the station, into the very heart of the city's political landscape. Council members, business owners, even the district attorney, all understood him in one way or another. But with great power came great paranoia. Graves knew that one crack in his armor could bring everything down, and Naomi Carter wasn't just a crack. She was a wrecking ball. The thread of Naomi Carter Graves' fingers tightened around the armrest as he recalled their encounters over the years. Naomi had always been a thorn in his side, challenging his cases, exposing flaws, and questioning authority. But he had always managed to outmaneuver her, until now. The White House's intervention was unexpected. It wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a sign that Naomi wasn't working alone. Graves' mind raced through possibilities. Who was backing her? Why now? He needed answers. He opened a secure folder on his computer, scrolling through files on Naomi Carter. Her education, career, notable cases, everything was there. But what caught his eye was a brief period after law school labeled simply classified: White House legal counsel. Graves leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "So, you got friends in high places," he muttered under his breath. "Let's see how loyal they really are." Later that night, Graves parked his black sedan in a deserted parking lot behind an old warehouse. The only light came from a flickering street lamp. He checked his watch, then glanced around, his senses sharp. A black SUV pulled up beside him. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a middle-aged man with slick-back hair and a cold smile. "Daniel," the man greeted, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "Senator Pierce," Graves replied, nodding curtly. Pierce, a senator known for his hard-line stance on law and order, leaned forward. "I hear you got problem." Graves scoffed. "More like a nuisance." "Naomi Carter." Pierce's smile faded. "Carter is dangerous. She doesn't scare easy. And now, she's at the White House watching her back. Then we need to act fast," Graves said. "If she keeps digging, she'll find more than just my skeletons. She'll find yours too." Pierce's eyes darkened. "Then make sure she doesn't. Whatever it takes." The window rolled up and the SUV drove off, leaving Graves alone with his thoughts. Whatever it takes. He knew what that meant. Back in his office, Graves made a call. "Frank, we need to tighten the noose. I want surveillance on Carter 24/7. Find out who she talks to, where she goes, and what she's planning. And if she gets too close." Boyd's voice asked from the other end. Graves' lips curled into a cold smile. "Then we remind her why people fear us." He hung up, his eyes drifting back to the image of Naomi. But even as he plotted, a sliver of doubt crept in. Naomi wasn't just another lawyer. She was playing a game he didn't fully understand yet, and that terrified him. Unbeknownst to Graves, Naomi was already a step ahead. She sat in her apartment, staring at her own laptop screen. Footage from a hidden camera showed Graves meeting with Senator Pierce. She leaned back, a sly smile forming. "You're not the only one who can pull strings, Graves," she whispered. But Naomi knew this was just the beginning. Graves wasn't the type to back down. She would need more than evidence to bring him down. She would need to dismantle his entire network. And she was ready. As the city slept, two forces prepared for battle. Graves, with his web of influence and ruthless tactics, and Naomi, with her unwavering determination and unseen allies. Both knew that only one would emerge victorious. Graves stared at the flickering screen one last time before shutting it off, and unseen allies. Both knew that only one would emerge victorious. Graves stared at the flickering screen one last time before shutting it off. He whispered to himself, "If she wants a war, I'll give her one." Naomi, watching from afar, simply smiled. In the heart of the courtroom, truth and corruption collide. One woman stands against a system designed to silence her. But as tensions reach a boiling point, an unexpected call from the White House changes everything. This is nonsense. That footage proves nothing. Naomi's eyes narrowed. It proves that someone tampered with evidence. Objection. Graves snapped, rising to his feet. Overruled. Judge Whitmore replied, though his eyes held a warning for Naomi to tread carefully. Graves' face darkened. "This is a waste of time. The evidence is clear. And this performance is nothing more than a distraction." Naomi took a step closer. A distraction. From what, Lieutenant? The truth? The gallery buzz. Whispers growing louder. Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel. "Order. Lieutenant Graves, control yourself." Graves turned to the judge, his voice cold. "Your Honor, I move to have Miss Carter removed from these proceedings. Her behavior is disruptive and unbecoming of this court." The room fell into stunned silence. Naomi's eyes flickered with a quiet defiance. She expected this. Graves' last-ditch effort to silence her. Judge Whitmore hesitated, glancing at Naomi. "Ms. Carter," Naomi spoke before he could finish. "On what grounds, Your Honor? Because I'm defending my client, or because certain individuals are uncomfortable with the truth being exposed?" Graves clenched his fists. "You're out of line." Naomi's voice remained calm, but the sharpness in her tone cut to the tension like a knife. "No, Lieutenant. I'm exactly where I need to be." The judge rubbed his temples. "Ms. Carter, I must ask you to—" The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A bailiff entered, walking briskly to the judge's bench. He handed Judge Whitmore a note, whispered something in his ear, and stepped back. The judge's expression shifted from frustration to shock. He picked up a phone beside him, his voice low but urgent. "This is Judge Whitmore." "Yes, I understand." Immediately, all eyes were on him. The judge hung up the phone, clearing his throat. "There's been a development." Graves frowned. "What kind of development?" Judge Whitmore's gaze flickered to Naomi before addressing the courtroom. "Effective immediately. Miss Carter will remain in these proceedings. No further actions are to be taken against her." Graves' face contorted in disbelief. "What? Who gave that order?" The judge's voice was firm. "The White House." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Graves' eyes widened, his composure cracking for the first time. "The White House?" Naomi allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She glanced at Graves, leaning in just enough for only him to hear. "Checkmate." Graves' voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't over." Naomi's eyes sparkled with quiet determination. "No, Lieutenant. It's just the beginning." The gavel pounded once more. "Court's adjourned for recess," Judge Whitmore announced, his tone still laced with disbelief. The crowd began to disperse. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on Rachel's shoulder. "We're going to win this." Rachel nodded, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in days. Graves, however, stormed out of the courtroom, his mind racing. How did she manage to pull this off? Outside, Naomi took a deep breath, the crisp afternoon air filling her lungs. She knew the battle was far from over, but for now, she had the upper hand. Her phone buzzed. A simple text message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. Well played, but stay sharp. The game has just begun. Naomi smiled faintly, whispering to herself, let's see who plays it better. When the highest office in the nation steps in, questions arise. Why protect a lone lawyer? What secrets does she hold? As the stakes grow higher, one woman prepares for a battle that could shake the system to its core. The echoes of the judge's words still lingered in the courtroom air. The White House, 2 words that carried immense weight, freezing everyone in place. Naomi Carter, though calm on the surface, felt the intensity of 1,000 curious eyes burning into her. She gathered her papers with meticulous precision, her mind already racing through possibilities. Lieutenant Graves, standing rigid near, the prosecution table, clenched his jaw so tightly that a muscle twitched violently. His gaze bore into Naomi, as if trying to unravel the mystery that had just blindsided him. The White House, why the hell would they care about her? Judge Whitmore, still grappling with the shock, announced a recess. The courtroom emptied slowly, murmurs filling the hallways like an approaching storm. Graves stormed out, his mind a whirlpool of rage and confusion. Naomi, on the other hand, walked out with deliberate calm, each step echoing confidence. Naomi closed the door behind her and let out a slow breath. She leaned against the desk, her fingers tapping rhythmically against its surface. The call from the White House had been expected, but not this soon. She reached for her phone, scrolling through recent messages until she found the one she needed. Tonight, usual place. Her reflection in the window showed a woman determined, but there was a flicker of something deeper, resolve mixed with the weight of responsibility. She knew this wasn't just about Rachel Hayes' case anymore. This was about dismantling an entire structure of corruption, and Graves was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Graves sat in his dimly lit office, fists clenched on the desk. Papers were scattered, a half-empty coffee cup precariously close to the edge. He picked up his phone, dialing a secure number. "We have a problem," he growled. A voice on the other end replied calmly, "Carter?" "Yes," Graves spat. "And now the damn White House is involved." There was a pause. Then the voice replied, "If the White House is protecting her, there's more at play than we thought. She's not just a lawyer, Daniel. She's something else." Graves slammed his fist down. "I need leverage. Something to keep her in check." "Find it," the voice instructed coldly, "before she finds you." Later that night, in a quiet, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, Naomi sat a corner booth, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. The bell above the door chimed softly as a man in a dark suit entered. His presence commanded attention, though his face was deliberately forgettable, the kind of person you pass by without a second glance. He slid into the booth across from Naomi, placing a plain manila envelope on the table. "Naomi," he greeted softly. "Agent Shaw." Naomi replied with a faint smile. Shaw leaned in, his voice low. "You stirred the pot earlier than we anticipated." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I didn't have much choice." Graves pushed too hard. Shaw nodded. "The White House's intervention bought you time, but also painted a target on your back." Naomi's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Wasn't it always there?" Shaw chuckled softly but quickly grew serious. "The president wants this handled quietly. Graves isn't just a road cop. He's connected to something bigger, something we've been trying to dismantle for years." Naomi's fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. "And you need me to be the spark." "You've always been a spark," Shaw replied, sliding the envelope closer. "Inside is everything we have on Graves. It's not enough for a conviction, but it's enough to shake him." Naomi took the envelope but didn't open it. "And what about the people protecting him?" Shaw's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. Graves is just one piece. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes. You're playing with fire, Naomi." Naomi's voice was barely a whisper. "Then let it burn." Back at the station, Graves pored over Naomi's past. He found old records, case files, and finally, a clue: her brief tenure at the White House as legal counsel. Why would a White House lawyer leave to become a defense attorney in a small town? He wondered. Then it clicked. She didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because she had a mission. Graves smirked, a sinister glint in his eyes. You think you're untouchable because of your connections, Naomi. We'll see how untouchable you are when your past comes back to haunt you. He picked up his phone. Give me everything on Naomi Carter. Every case, every client, every mistake. Even if there aren't any, his contact asked. Then make one. Graves hissed. Naomi back in her apartment. Opened the envelope Shaw had given her. Photos, documents, surveillance logs. Graves' entire network laid bare. But it wasn't just Graves. Names of politicians, judges, and businessmen, all connected by threads of corruption. Her phone buzzed. A message from Shaw. They know you're coming. Be ready. Naomi's reflection in the mirror was resolute. She whispered to herself, I've always been ready. A city unaware of the storm brewing beneath its surface. Two powerful forces locked in a silent war. One fights for justice, the other for control. And in this deadly game, every move counts. Naomi Carter knew the battle had truly begun the moment she stepped out of the courthouse that day. The air was crisp, but chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran down her spine. She felt it. The invisible gaze of someone watching, waiting. Graves winced quietly, and neither would she. That night, as Naomi sat in her apartment reviewing the files Agent Shaw had given her, a faint sound caught her attention. A subtle click, barely audible, but distinct to someone trained to notice such things. Without turning her head, she carefully closed a folder, slid it into a drawer, and casually walked to a window. A black SUV was parked across the street, engine off, but she could see the faint glow of a cigarette through the tinted glass. Graves' men. Naomi's lips curled into a faint smirk. Already playing dirty. Graves? Good. So am I. At the Arlington Police Department. Graves paced his office like a caged predator. The flickering light from his desk lamp cast sharp shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil within him. Detective Lucas Boyd, his trusted ally, leaned against a doorframe. She's on to us, Boyd muttered. Of course she is. Graves snapped. But that doesn't matter. We'll make sure she never gets a chance to use what she knows. Boyd raised an eyebrow. What's the plan? Graves' eyes gleamed with cold calculation. We hit her where it hurts. Her reputation. He tossed a manila folder onto the desk. Boyd opened it to find fabricated documents, false claims of bribery, conflict of interest, even whispers of witness tampering. None of this is true, Boyd remarked, though there was no trace of concern in his voice. Graves chuckled darkly. Truth is irrelevant. Perception is everything. Leak this to the right people. By the time she clears her name, it'll be too late. Boyd nodded and left, already dialing a number. Graves leaned back in his chair, satisfied, but deep down, he knew Naomi wouldn't go down without a fight. Naomi wasn't surprised when the first news article surfaced the next morning. Prominent defense attorney Naomi Carter, accused of legal misconduct. The headline was bold, the accusations flimsy, but the damage had begun. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, clients, and concerned colleagues. She ignored them all. She had no time for distractions. Instead, Naomi made her way to a small nondescript office downtown. Inside, a young woman with glasses perched on her nose and fingers flying over a keyboard looked up. Figured you'd be here, the woman, Emily Walker, said with a grin. I need intel, Naomi replied, skipping pleasantries. Emily, a tech genius and one of Naomi's most trusted allies, nodded. Already on it. Graves is pulling out all the stops. Surveillance on your apartment. Tapping your calls. And she paused, biting her lip. He's digging into your past, hard. Naomi's expression didn't change. Let him dig, but I need dirt on him. Real dirt. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard. Give me an hour. Naomi nodded, her mind already strategizing. Later that night, Naomi left Emily's office, her steps brisk and deliberate. She needed to clear her mind, but fate had other plans. As she turned a corner, a figure stepped into her path. Graves. Working late, Carter, he asked, voice dripping with mockery. Enjoying the nightlife, Graves. Naomi shot back without missing a beat. They stood face to face, the tension between them almost tangible. "Careful, Naomi," Graves whispered, leaning in. "You're playing a dangerous game." Naomi's smile was razor-sharp. "Then it's a good thing I play to win." Graves' smile faltered. "Just for a moment. You won't see me coming," he warned. "Funny," Naomi replied softly, leaning in closer. "I was about to say the same thing." She walked past him, leaving Graves standing alone, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Back in her apartment, Naomi found a secure message from Emily. Attached were surveillance photos, bank records, and coded communications, all linked to Graves. But one detail stood out: a transfer from an anonymous account to Graves' personal account dated just a day before Rachel Hayes' arrest. "He's being paid," Naomi realized. But by whom? Her phone buzzed. It was Emily. "I traced the account. Offshore. Belongs to a shell company tied to, well, you won't believe this, Senator Pierce." Naomi's heart raced. Senator Pierce, known for his tough-on-crime stance, was backing Graves. This wasn't just about a corrupt cop anymore. It was about a web of power stretching far beyond Arlington. Naomi knew what she had to do. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Agent Shaw," she whispered, "I need backup. A secret network of corruption hidden in plain sight. A lure armed with undeniable truth. And a showdown that will leave an entire town in shock." The morning sun cast a golden glow over the Arlington County Courthouse, but the tension in the air was anything but serene. Inside, the courtroom was packed once again, murmurs filling the room like a low hum of electricity. The previous day's events still lingered in everyone's minds. The White House intervention, Naomi Carter's defiant stance, and Lieutenant Graves' growing unease. Naomi sat at the defense table, calm as ever, but her mind was sharp, calculating every possible move. Today was the day. She glanced at Rachel Hayes, offering a reassuring smile. Rachel, though still nervous, nodded back. Across the room, Graves adjusted his tie, his usual smirk back in place, but there was an edge to him today. He believed he had silenced Naomi's efforts, tarnished her reputation, and ensured his own protection. But Naomi knew better. Judge Whitmore entered, banging his gavel for order. "Let's proceed," he announced. Naomi stood. "Your Honor, before we continue with the defense, I have new evidence to present." Graves immediately stood, his voice sharp objection. "The defense has had ample time to present evidence. This is clearly a last-ditch attempt to derail these proceedings." Judge Whitmore frowned but gestured to Naomi. "I'll allow it, but this better be relevant." "Ms. Carter," Naomi nodded, stepping forward. "It's not just relevant, Your Honor. It's critical." She turned to the jury, her voice steady. "For weeks we debated whether my client, Rachel Hayes, committed a crime. But the real crime isn't what she allegedly did. It's what was done to her." Gasps echoed through the room. Graves' eyes narrowed. Naomi continued, "This case is more than a simple arrest. It's a threat and a web of corruption that extends far beyond this courtroom." Graves scoffed. "More baseless accusations. Is this your defense strategy, Ms. Carter? Conspiracy theories?" Naomi's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let's see what the evidence says." Naomi gestured to the courtroom's monitor. Emily Walker, seated quietly in the back, tapped her laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of transactions. "Here," Naomi pointed, "we see multiple payments made to Lieutenant Graves' account from a shell company registered offshore." Judge Whitmore leaned in, brows furrowed. "And what is this supposed to prove?" Naomi's gaze locked onto Graves. "That Lieutenant Graves isn't just enforcing the law. He's selling it." The room erupted. Graves shot up from his seat. "This is absurd. Fabricated evidence." Naomi raised a hand. "I thought you might say that." Another click from Emily's laptop, and a video began playing. The grainy footage showed Graves in a dimly lit parking lot, shaking hands with a man in a suit, Senator Pierce. Graves' face went pale. The video continued, capturing fragments of their conversation. "Make sure she's arrested. Quietly. And my payment already transferred." Judge Whitmore's gavel slammed down. "Lieutenant Graves, explain this." Grave voice wavered. This is a misunderstanding. That's not real. Naomi stepped forward. It's very real, Your Honor. And there's more. Naomi's voice cut through the rising whispers. Lieutenant Graves have been orchestrating wrongful arrests, planting evidence and silencing those who dare oppose him. And he hasn't done it alone. She turned back to the screen. This ledger lists every individual involved, from officers to politicians. The names flashed one by one, each more shocking than the last. Gasps filled the room as familiar names appeared. Judges, council members, even prosecutors. Graves' breath quickened. You think you can ruin me with this circus act? Naomi's eyes gleamed. I don't need to. The truth already has. The courtroom doors burst open, and a team of federal agents led by Agent Shaw strode in. Lieutenant Daniel Graves, Shaw announced, "You're under arrest for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice." Graves backed away, panic finally breaking through his facade. "You can't do this. I'm exactly who we've been watching for months," Shaw finished, snapping the cuffs onto Graves' wrists. The courtroom buzzed with shock as Graves was let out, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Judge Whitmore adjourned the session, his own expression unreadable. Naomi turned to Rachel, who stared in awe. "It's over," Naomi whispered. Rachel hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you so much." Naomi nodded, but her eyes were already on the horizon. She knew this was just one battle. The war was far from over. When the walls close and even the most untouchable crumble, a corrupt officer faces his reckoning, and one woman's fight for justice shakes an entire system. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead as Daniel Graves sat in a cold metal chair, his hands cuffed to the table. The interrogation room was stark and unforgiving, a far cry from the office he once commanded with fear and authority. His usually composed demeanor was now fractured, eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Across from him, Agent Shaw calmly placed a thick folder on the table. "Quite the collection of charges you've accumulated, Lieutenant," Shaw said almost casually. "Bribery, evidence tampering, obstruction justice, and let's not forget conspiracy." Graves leaned forward, forcing a smirk. "You think you got me figured out, huh? I've seen cases like this fall apart. All it takes is one technicality." Shaw's smile didn't falter. "Maybe, but not this time." He slid a document toward Graves. "Signed testimonies from your former associates. Seems loyalty has its limits." Graves' smirk faded. His network, the people he trusted to keep him untouchable, had turned on him. The Arlington courthouse was once again filled capacity, but this time the attention wasn't on Naomi Carter. It was on Daniel Graves, standing at the defendant's table, his polished uniform replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The sight sent waves of disbelief through the room. Judge Whitmore, now presiding over Graves' trial, looked down at the disgraced lieutenant. "Lieutenant Graves, you stand accused of multiple counts of corruption, including the abuse of your authority as a law enforcement officer. How do you plead?" Graves' voice was low but defiant. "Not guilty." A murmur spread through the gallery. Naomi, seated in the back, watched intently. She knew Graves wouldn't go down easily, but she also knew that the evidence against him was overwhelming. The prosecution presented a damning case. Transaction records, surveillance footage, and testimonies painted a clear picture. Graves had manipulated the system for years, targeting vulnerable individuals and profiting from their suffering. His ties to Senator Pierce and other high-ranking officials were laid bare, exposing a network of corruption that extended far beyond Arlington. One by one, former allies testified against him. Detective Lucas Boyd, once his closest confidant, stood on a witness stand, avoiding Graves' glare. "I followed his orders because I was afraid," Boyd admitted. "We all were, but enough is enough." Graves clenched his fists, the betrayal cutting deeper than he expected. When Naomi Carter took the stand, the room fell silent. She detailed her investigation, the threat she faced, and the lengths Graves went to in order to silence her. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Naomi said, her voice steady. "It's about accountability. And today we hold those in power accountable." Her words resonated, not just with the jury, but with everyone present. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. On the charges of bribery, guilty. On the charges of evidence tampering, guilty. On the charges of obstruction of justice, guilty. Each word felt like a nail in Graves' coffin. His shoulders slumped as the final verdict was read. Judge Whitmore's voice was firm. Daniel Graves, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. A collective gasp filled the room. Graves stared ahead, his once iron grip on the system now reduced to nothing. The fallout was immediate. Headlines screamed the scandal, shaking Arlington and beyond. Investigations into the police department revealed a deeply rooted culture of corruption. Officers resigned, politicians distanced themselves, and reforms were promised. Naomi became an overnight symbol of justice, but she avoided the spotlight, focusing instead on her work. Days later, Naomi sat in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee when Agent Shaw slid into the seat across from her. You did it, he said. We did it, Naomi corrected. Shaw chuckled softly. The president is impressed and grateful. There's talk about bringing you back. The D.C. Naomi shook her head. I belong here. I belong. People still need me. Shaw nodded. If you ever change your mind, Naomi smirked, I'll know who to call. Back in her office, Naomi gazed out the window. The city sprawling beneath her. The war against corruption wasn't over. But today, justice had won. She whispered softly, one battle down. But the war is far from over. Justice was served, but the fight isn't over. For Naomi Carter, every ending is just the start of another battle. And this time, the stakes are even higher. The Arlington County Courthouse stood eerily silent in the aftermath of Daniel Graves' sentencing. The echoes of the verdict still lingered in the minds of those who witnessed it. Naomi Carter, however, had already moved on. Justice had been served, but she knew the shadows that lurked behind men. Like Graves didn't vanish with a single conviction. In her modest office, Naomi sat at her desk, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating the files scattered before her. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of a photo. A younger Naomi, bright-eyed and full of determination, standing in front of the Howard University School of Law. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection before a soft knock at the door pulled her back to the present. Come in, she called. Emily Walker entered, her laptop tucked under one arm and a coffee cup in the other. Figured you'd need this, she said, placing the cup down. Naomi chuckled softly. You know me too well. Emily settled into the chair opposite Naomi. So it's over. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Is it ever really over? Emily sighed. Graves was behind bars, his network dismantled. That's a win. Naomi leaned back. A win, yes, but there's always another fight. Emily smirked. Speaking of fights, something interesting popped up this morning. A win, yes, but there's always another fight. Emily smirked. Speaking of fights, something interesting popped up this morning. Naomi leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. Emily opened her laptop, spinning it around to face Naomi. I was digging through some old files and found something curious. Graves wasn't acting alone. There's someone else, someone bigger. The screen displayed a name Naomi hadn't seen in years. Alexander Monroe. Naomi's breath caught. Pierce? Are you sure? Emily nodded. Positive. He funded Graves' operations, and from what I can tell, he's still active. Alexander Monroe, a former high-ranking official turned private contractor, was notorious for his shady dealings and deep political connections. Naomi had crossed paths with him during her time at the White House, but his influence had made him untouchable. Looks like I'm not done yet, Naomi whispered. Later that evening, as the city settled into its nighttime rhythm, Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her heart skipping a beat at the familiar number. Agent Shaw, she answered. Naomi. Shaw's voice was calm but held a hint of urgency. We need to talk. Pierce? She asked, already knowing the answer. Yes, Shaw confirmed. We've been monitoring him, but he's careful. Too careful. We need someone on the inside. Naomi's fingers drummed against the desk. And you think that someone is me? You have history with him. Shaw said. And after Graves, your instincts are shays than ever. Naomi chuckled softly. Flattery won't get you everywhere, Shaw. This isn't flattery, Carter. It's necessity, Shaw replied. Pierce is dangerous, more dangerous than Graves ever was. Naomi sighed, rubbing her temples. I thought I was done. You're never done, Shaw said quietly. Not you. The line went silent for a moment before Naomi spoke again. When do we start? Naomi's apartment became her war room. Files on Pierce were spread across every surface. Photos, financial records, and timelines created a web of connections, each thread more sinister than the last. Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, typing furiously. Pierce has a fortress of security. We're going to need more than just brains to get to him. Naomi nodded. Then we brained backup. She picked up her phone and made several calls, each to someone she trusted implicitly. Within hours, a small but formidable team had assembled in her living room. Up her phone and made several calls, each to someone she trusted implicitly. Within hours, a small but formidable team had assembled in her living room. Former colleagues, investigators, and even a hacker known only as Raven. This won't be easy, Naomi addressed them. Pierce is smart, connected, and ruthless. But so are we. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. As the night wore on, Naomi found herself alone on her balcony, the city lights flickering below. She thought of Rachel Hayes, now reunited with her son, free from the nightmare Graves had orchestrated. Moments like that made the fight worth it. Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. I know you're coming. I'll be waiting. JP. Naomi's grip on the phone tightened, but a determined smile played on her lips. Let the games begin, she whispered to the night. And so, Naomi Carter walked away from one battle, knowing another awaited. In a world where power often corrupts, she remained unshaken, a beacon of justice, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. If you were inspired by Naomi's journey and want more gripping stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications.